In 1990, the futurologist Alvin Toffler published Powershift, Knowledge, Wealth, and Violence at the Age of the 21st Century, a book about the crescendoing struggles for power that still face the world as the industrial civilization loses world dominance and new forces arise to tower over the earth. The Powershift book was structured through an important collective information. Toffler talks about meetings for hours with the most powerful leaders of the world such as Mikhail Gorbachev, Ronald Reagan, George Bush, several Japanese prime ministers, and others such as staff people who shape decisions in the White House, in the Élysée Palace in Paris, in the Prime Minister's office in Tokyo, and even in the offices of the Central Committee at the Communist Party in Moscow. Toffler also visited the most powerless people on earth, like the squatters in a South American city of misery, as well as women prisoners under life sentence. Discussions about power with bankers, labor unionists, business leaders, computer experts, generals, Nobel Prize-winning scientists, oil tycoons, journalists, and the top managers of many of the world's biggest companies were very helpful in the construction of this book. Powershift means a transfer of power, a deep-level change in the very nature of power. This change is linked to knowledge that is switching from an agent of money power and muscle power to the essence of power itself. Battles are taking place in the world to control knowledge and the means of communication. So what is a knowledge power? In this new era of post-industrial civilization, knowledge is more accessible than ever. If you take a look at the medical journals, they are now reachable for everyone and not just physicians. Knowledge doesn't get used up, which means that the rules of the knowledge power game are sharply different from the precepts relied on by those who use force or money to accomplish their will. Therefore, knowledge is the most democratic source of power, making it a continuing threat to powerful, even as they use it to enhance their own power. It also demonstrates why every powerful holder wants to control the quantity, quality, and distribution of knowledge within their domain. Heightened competition and accelerated change define today's market. Constant innovation is the answer to this new environment. However, each attempt to innovate sparks resistance and new power conflicts. This situation gets more intense as companies are becoming more and more interdependent. A power upheaval in one firm frequently produces reverberating shifts of power elsewhere. This interdependency is also observed in the use of data. Toffler writes that information gained by the sales and marketing people feeds the engineers whose innovation need to be understood by the financial people, whose ability to raise capital depends on how well satisfied the customers are, which depends on how well scheduled the company's trucks are, which depends in part on employee motivation, which depends on a paycheck plus a sense of achievement, etc., etc. Such connectivity and integration function in an economy characterized by chaotic conditions. Businesses are thriving on chaos, a phenomenon that shifts an economy constantly structured by a force of creative destruction, according to the concept of Joseph Schumpeter. But chaos also generates violence. Toffler notices that corporations and governments resort to open violence less often than in the pre-industrial past. The instrument that is mainly used in this new era to control people is money. The growing dependence of the population on money, as well as the monopolization and sublimation of violence into law, made it possible for elites to make use of wealth rather than overt force to impose their will on history. This is what Powershift is truly about. It is not simply a transfer of power from one person or group to another, but a fundamental change in the mix of violence, wealth, and knowledge employed by elites to control and maintain power. Thus, capital is becoming super-symbolic. Any country that, out of choice, pursue policies based on materialism condemns itself to becoming the Bangladesh of the 21st century, according to the author. The proletariat is now increasingly replaced by a cognitariat, and that is why the most effective strategy for reducing joblessness must depend less on the allocation of wealth and more on the allocation of knowledge. Companies are using computers and telecommunications to communicate, to sell, to buy, to stock information, in short, to function. National power is now linked to communication system, becoming a measuring tool for the rise or the decline of nations. For instance, as late as 1957, half of all the telephones in the world were in the United States. Today, as America's relative dominance declines, that percentage has slipped to about 1/3. Extra intelligence, as Toffler calls it, is raising perplexing questions about the relationship of data to information knowledge, about language, about ethics, and so on. The fear of extra intelligence is related to global private monopoly of information. The author advances the concept of information war to highlight the existence of info warriors at every level of business, fighting to control the most crucial resource of the Powershift era. The safer and surer a business information system, and the better it is protected, predefined, pre-structured, and policed, the more it will constrain creativity and constipate the organization, writes Toffler. Anti-bureaucracy is the new form of administration, characterizing the super-symbolic economy. The fixed firm concept does not imply tracklessness according to Toffler. It does suggest that the company of tomorrow may embody different formats within a single frame. Here, power switches from those with legal or formal position to those with natural authority based on knowledge and certain psychological and political skills. By breaking bureaucracy, businesses allow employees to be creative. This creativity exceeds the sphere of the company by involving other people in the network of employees who come together to solve business problems. Knowledge and decision load are being redistributed. A continual cycle of learning, unlearning, and relearning is taking place in companies where workers need to master new techniques, adapt to new organizational forms, and come up with new ideas. The pace of economic activity speeds up, and time becomes the most precious currency ever. This new system of wealth holds profound implications for individual businesses, as well as for the whole economies and global relations among economies. 12 elements of the accelerative economy were highlighted by the author. The new system of wealth is dependent more than ever on the exchange of data. This new system goes beyond mass production to flexible production. Conventional factors of production become less important as symbolic knowledge is substituted for them. Electronic information becomes the true medium of exchange. Goods and services are modularized and configured into systems. This leads to wars for control of the information. Slow-moving bureaucracies are replaced by adhocracy organizations. The number and variety of organizational units multiply, which requires more communication and transaction. Tools of production are now symbols inside workers' heads. The new hero is the innovator who combines imaginative knowledge with action. Wealth is becoming a circular process. This method requires a deep level of scientific and environmental knowledge. Producers and consumers are reunited. They become a prosumer. The new wealth creation system is both local and global. Many functions spill over national boundaries, integrating activities in many nations into a single productive effort. Healthy democracies, as Toffler calls them, should tolerate diversity while establishing a balanced political system. The economy must be based on free exchange of ideas, innovative theories, and a questioning of authority. However, the actual system is facing adversity, and privatization is usually how leaders are trying to cope with the new realities. The dangers that will face the world, according to Toffler, is ecological catastrophe, the breakup of long-standing military balances, economic upheavals, technological revolutions, fundamentalism, accompanied in some cases by terrorism, and extreme xenophobia, hatred for the foreigner. Toffler insists that democracy does not last in governments controlled or heavily influenced by extremists who put their particular brand of religion, ecology, or nationalism ahead of democratic values. That is to say, religion is not the enemy of democracy, because in a secular, multi-religious society with a clear separation of state and church, the very variety of beliefs and unbeliefs adds to the vibrance and dynamism of democracy. The new global media system could deepen diversity. Instead of a single global village, according to Marshall McLuhan's theory, we are likely to see multiplicity of quite different global villages. Thus, some attempts to contain specific information within national borders can generate the opposite effect. For instance, when Peter Wright, who was a scientist officer for a British counterintelligence, wrote his book Spycatcher, in which he made serious accusations against former officials of British counterintelligence, the British attempt to suppress the book failed. Instead, Spycatcher turned into an international bestseller. Televisions and newspapers everywhere carried stories about it. As Toffler says, the British government was compelled to back down, and Wright's book went on to become a bestseller in Britain too. Freedom and social justice now depend on how societies deal with education, information technology, including the media, and freedom of expression. The New World System is surely encouraging freedom more than ever. However, that does not mean that democracy should always give access to total information, because this could mean total lack of individual privacy. The 21st century witnessed the rise in Japan, a powerful capital center alongside the USA and Europe. The creativity and the tremendous hard work of its post-war generation, the importance its culture pays to education, business intelligence, and knowledge in general, as well as the investment of its government on electronics and information technology, are all variety of reasons making Japan leaping ahead. In fact, the super-symbolic economy teaches us that what's happening in the world today is the exact opposite of Marx's theory on materialism. It is knowledge that drives the economy, not the other way around. Knowledge is not just a matter of science and technology. It is learning about your adversary, like Japan is doing much better than the USA, according to Toffler. Knowledge is also about strategy, because without a good strategy, wealth cannot be well managed. And this is what's happening in Europe, a continent with tremendous wealth, but so far a questionable strategy for how to use it. According to Toffler, the USA have a balanced power compared to the two other great capital centers in the world, which are Europe and Japan. America succeeded in building a great culture weapon system that helps to integrate the different aspects of its economy. In brief, major changes are happening in the global economy, and knowledge is the fuel behind it all. For instance, in Japan or the United States, factories employ a handful of highly educated, highly paid employees. This choice is proven to be more profitable to companies than depending on masses of badly educated, low-wage workers. Therefore, the gap today is no longer about the North versus the South. It is about the slow versus the fast. Today, slow countries have the possibility to skip over an entire stage of infrastructure development and invest to build the third wave communications. The new economic imperative is clear according to Toffler. Overseas suppliers from developing countries will either advance their own technologies to meet the world's speed standards, or they will be brutally cut off from their markets, casualties of the acceleration effect. One of the major critics we can think of in the work of Toffler is the absolute absence of a prospective analysis about China. How can a worldwide futurologist such as Toffler not see coming the international dominance of China? Moreover, the few times Toffler mentioned China was to illustrate an example of a developing country that could possibly erupt in civil war. Another element we can point out in Toffler's work is his American patriotism that sometimes dominates his rational analysis. Toffler would always compare the USA to Russia in order to conclude the greatness of his country as opposed to the fascism and crisis of the Soviet Union. Other critics concern Toffler's radical prediction about the super-symbolic economy, such as the thrive of horizontal, self-regulation, and innovative businesses to the detriment of Taylorian companies. However, many dominant companies around the world are still dependent on low-wage employees enduring hard work conditions. Moreover, we are still witnessing the rise of a new form of digital Taylorism in the delivery driver jobs, ride-sharing, and micro-work provided by high-tech companies such as Uber and Amazon.